Hello everyone, nice to see you again. Welcome to this ninth class of the Strategic Management Unit. I hope that you enjoy our guest speaker, Adela Navarrete. I think that we are able to have another guest speaker on next week or maybe in 2 weeks, who is going to explain us the main soft skills that companies are requiring right now and the main soft skills to become a leader. So it's going to be a really interesting session as well. Please, this is for remind you that you have until 12 o'clock of your time zone today to submit the second summary paper about the coronavirus crisis, the economic impact of such crisis. I will say that you do not have to worry about the final exam. We are going to make an overview on the day before. I'm going to give you a lot of clues. So I would rather prefer that you understand all the contents, that you focus on the quizzes, you focus on the discussions that we're having, you focus on the second summary paper, on the written case analysis and the strategic analysis project. If you have any query or doubt, please contact me. And you do not have to worry about the final exam. Well, this is the ninth class. We are close to the end, and during this video we are going to speak about a very interesting topic which has been more and more important during that last years, which is the company's code of conduct. Well, before speaking about the company's code of conduct, we have to bring the content that we saw on the second class of the course about the corporate social responsibility. In particular, we have to remember the Carroll theory, the Carroll pyramid approach. As you may remember, Carroll stated that there were 4 levels of fulfillment within companies, within responsibilities within companies. First of all, the first responsibility of companies is to be economically sustainable, to pay its debtors, to pay its employees, its suppliers. The second responsibility is the legal responsibility. A company has to fulfill with all laws, regulations, with all requirements, of course, paying tax and do not avoid any taxes. And the third level will be the ethical level, and the fourth one, the philanthropic level. Well, we think that we are in this video speaking about the third one, the ethic level. So it's beyond legal compliance, but companies nowadays have another very important responsibility, which is the ethical responsibilities, ethical liabilities. So I would say that society, consumers, mass media are not asking companies just to fulfill the laws. You have to take into account that sometimes there are loopholes or there are gaps in laws, and nowadays society, we are requiring more for big companies. We are requiring them to be ethical. And during this video, we're going to speak about a very important topic, which is codes of conduct and how companies try to write it down their ethical values. And we are going to have at least 4 different codes of conduct. Here you can see the 4 codes of conduct that you may see in every big company, for example, in listed company. They are not mandatory codes. As we said, we are not in the legal level, we are in the ethical level. That's something that stakeholders are requiring, investors are requiring, society, mass media, and since a few years, a lot of big companies started working on codes of conduct so that they could write down what are the values and in which cases they can, for example, breach their contracts with suppliers if they do not fulfill the codes of conduct. So I would say that mainly we can find 4 different codes of conduct. Of course, it's going to depend on the company, it's going to depend on the sector, but Usually we can find 4 different ones. First of all, we can find the code of conduct of manufacturers and suppliers. Second one, the code of conduct and responsibility practice, which is applicable to employees and all parties within the company. Third one, the manual of criminal risk prevention, very important. And finally, a procedure of whistleblowing channel. And usually there in big companies we have a committee of ethics which receive all the whistleblowing and all the complaints about the degree of compliance of such code of conduct, which is called the committee of ethics. During this video we are gonna focus on 2 big companies of the textile industry, which are Zara, Inditex, and Primark. But we are gonna have things for different codes of conduct on different listed companies, both Americans and Spanish companies and other kind of companies. A general rule, a general statement that is written down in every code of conduct is as follows. All employees, all manufacturers, suppliers, or even third parties with any direct relationship and lawful business or professional interest, regardless of their geographical location, shall fulfill with certain ethical requirements and minimum standards. As you may be aware of, the level of requirement on listed companies, on big companies, have increased a lot during the last years. Due for the deslocalization, those size companies in a lot of times require to suppliers or manufacturers which are located abroad with a less strict legal framework, and sometimes when several scandals arrive related with such suppliers or manufacturers, the big companies say that there was the suppliers' problem, that they didn't have anything to do with such scandals. But this is not a solution anymore. This solution is no longer valid. So nowadays our society requires high standards of fulfillment of ethical standards, not just for the parent company, not just for the big company itself, but as well for the suppliers of all the company, regardless where they are located, for the manufacturers, for all the employees, and at the end with all the stakeholders, all the people involved around such company, such to fulfill high standards, high ethical standards, regardless their location. What's the main purpose of a supplier's code of conduct? Well, mainly it's to provide the parent company with a helmet and shield before any scandals that any suppliers or manufacturers could have. If there is any breach of the code of conduct, of course, it's going to allow the parent company to breach the contract that have between parties, and to say, well, you were not fulfilling with our code of conduct, so I'm allowed to breach the contract. And this is a barrier for the public opinion, for the media, and this is definitely helmet and shield before the breaches on the suppliers or manufacturers. We are going to start with some concrete standards that all suppliers and manufacturers of big companies have to fulfill. They are not strictly, for example, rights of labor, because you have to take into account that depending on the localization, on where the manufacturers are located, maybe such standards are not recognized as rights. Okay, but this is standards that supplier manufacturer of my company had to fulfill regardless where it's located, or if they do not fulfill with such requirements, I'm not going to work with them anymore. Okay. The first standard is, of course, employment is freely chosen. There is no force or compulsory labor in any form, including bond, traffic, or prison labor. I will say an exception about prison labor. For example, here in Spain, we have a strong system on prison labor, but it's not a forced labor at all. So the prisoners can choose if they want to work or no, and there is a lot of advantages for those who want to work. So maybe in the case that the employment is freely chosen, we can find some manufacturers or suppliers which have any prison labor. And finally, of course, workers shall not be required to lodge deposits or their identity papers with their employee, and they are free to leave the employer after reasonable notice. So this is due that several suppliers or manufacturers oblige their employees to deposit their ID cards, for example, until the end of the day, and this is not a valid practice anymore. Another standard that our suppliers have to fulfill with is the freedom of association and the right of collective bargaining. Well, of course, you have to be aware that we are not speaking about American companies or Spanish companies. This code of conduct is usually thinking on companies in other countries as China or India, Bangladesh, which have a very tiny legal framework for such kind of things. Okay, but regardless the legal framework, what we are requiring to our suppliers, to our manufacturers, is that they respect the freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining. So workers have the right to join trade unions of their own choosing and to bargain collectively. And the employers shall adopt an open attitude towards the activities of trade unions, and workers' representatives shall not be discriminated against and have access to carry out their representative functions in the workplace. Another standards that our suppliers and manufacturers shall to fulfill if they want to work with us is working conditions shall to be safe and hygienic. A safe and hygienic working environment shall be provided. Adequate steps shall be taken to prevent accidents and injury to health arising out of associated with. Workers shall receive regular and recorded health and safety training, and such training shall be repeated for new or reassignment workers. And finally, accommodation where provided shall to be clean, safe, and meet the basic needs of the workers. As we were speaking, this kind of code of conducts were not created by chance or were not created by the willing of some employee with nothing to do in the companies. They were created because there were a lot of scandals in companies related with its suppliers and manufacturers that usually were located abroad. So we are going to see, for example, a case about a manufacturer of Apple in China with a very poor working conditions, and at the end Apple could control such a scandal, but it was about to create a big problem in the parent company. So it's just an example of thousand examples that you can find of suppliers that were not very committed with high standards required, and after the approval of the code of conducts, big companies have an excuse to breach the contract with such kind of suppliers and have more bargaining power to require them to fulfill with a higher working standards. So we're gonna see an example, a brief video about an example of Apple supplier in China.
This is where your iPhone 6 comes from. These are the first secret pictures from inside the factories that produce for Apple. An exhausted workforce, people sleeping on their breaks, others falling asleep as they work. In 2010, after 14 workers killed themselves at another factory producing iPhones, Apple published promises to protect workers. So have things changed? Our undercover reporters got jobs through agencies, and within minutes, Apple's rules were broken. Everyone in China needs to carry an ID card. Our workers' card has been taken.
They said they needed to see my ID. When they got it, they didn't return it to me. I demanded that they return it. I felt helpless.
They came to work at Pegatron, where iPhones and iPads are assembled. They have to pass a crucial health and safety exam. They will. The answers are chanted out. And they're offered a choice whether they want to work nights or do work standing up. But there's no choice. He
said if you don't do what the company asks you to do, what is the point of employing you here?
Apple told us they've seen no evidence of coaching. On ID cards, Apple says they've done more than any company to prevent the widespread abuse of migrant workers. Once in, our reporters were overwhelmed by the workload. Shifts have overtime built in, so workers regularly do more than 60 hours a week, more than Apple's guidelines. And so workers rested when they could. This iPhone 6 testing area has virtually no one awake. Apple says they'll examine sleeping during production, but napping on breaks is not unusual.
Apple has been championing itself as a perfect enterprise, but it is all a facade. I don't think they care about the workers at all.
Pegatron, who run the factory, say they are carefully investigating the BBC's claims and will take all necessary actions. Apple say they work with suppliers to prevent excessive overtime and that no other company is doing as much to ensure fair and safe working conditions. What we found were broken promises on the iPhone factory floor. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Shanghai.
Another standard that is starting to be required to our suppliers or manufacturers are the environmental awareness. As you are aware, the environmental awareness is increasing a lot in our society, and nowadays consumers require that a company are sustainable, or at least they have a small carbon footprint. So another usual requirement in companies' code of conduct of suppliers are that manufacturers and suppliers shall be duly committed at all times to protect the environment and shall comply with all the standards and requirements of the applicable local and international laws and regulations. So at least to fulfill the laws, but finally they have to show as well their commitment to comply with environmental standards, including the necessary measures to reduce and compensate such impact in order to apply such standards. So at least reduce the maximum possible their carbon footprint. Another labor standard that big companies used to require to their suppliers and manufacturers is that child labor shall not be used. And you have to remember that we are not speaking about the legal framework on those countries, on those suppliers or manufacturers. Maybe in Bangladesh, it's allowed to work since you are 12 or 13 years old, but you as parent company shall to require your suppliers and manufacturers that, despite the fact that it's allowed by law in your country, you cannot recruit any child labor, and for example, namely that you can be considered a child below 15 years old, for example. Okay, it's gonna depend on the companies, but maybe below 15 or 16 years old. And children and young person under 20 years old shall not be employed at night or in dangerous conditions. Another standard that is usually required from our suppliers or manufacturers are that living wages are paid. So despite the fact that the minimum wage is very low in those countries, you have to pay a minimum living wage so that the employee have a decent life, and it is said, for example, that wages and benefits paid for a standard working week meet at minimum national legal standards or industry benchmark standards, whichever is higher. And in any case, the wages should always be enough both to meet basic needs and to provide some discretionary income. So it's not necessarily just that our living wage allow us to buy food or clothes. It has to provide us with some discretionary income. And our workers shall be provided with a written and understandable information about their employment conditions in respect to wages before they enter in the employment. And finally, in general, deductions from wages and salaries as disciplinary measures shall not be permitted. Another very important topic is that we as a company shall to require our suppliers or manufacturers that they fulfill with certain working hours, and such working hours shall not be excessive, despite the fact that this limit is allowed in their legal framework, but we have to require them that, for example, standard working hours, excluding overtime, shall not exceed 84 hours per week, for example. Another important point is that all overtime hours shall be voluntary, so you cannot require your employees to make overtime hours. And finally, overtime hours shall always be compensated with a premium rate, which is recommended to be not less than 125% of the regular rate of pay. Another very important standard that we have to require our suppliers or manufacturers, despite the fact that the legal framework requires them, is that no discrimination practices shall be allowed. For example, there shall not be discrimination in hiring, in compensation, access to training, promotion, termination or retirement based on race, caste, national origin, religion, age, disability, gender, marital status, sexual orientation, union membership, or political affiliation or other reason. So no discrimination practices shall be allowed. Another very important standard that we have to require our suppliers or manufacturers is that regular employment shall be provided. To every extent possible, work performed must be on the basis of recognized employment relationships established through national law and practices. And moreover, obligations to employees under labor or social security laws and regulations arising from the regular employment relationship shall not be avoided through the use of labor-only contracting, subcontracting, or home working arrangement. I think that I have already spoken about the cases of Deliveroo or Globo, which are two of the main companies here in Spain, two of the main riders company, and they hire their employees through the form of if they were independent contractors, independent workers, and our inspectorate, our labor inspectorate, has determined that they are not independent workers, they are not self-employees, rather than they are employees. So, for example, in these cases, our company's code of conduct obliges the company to directly hire the employees and to provide them with all the benefits and all the requirements for the social security laws and regulations. Another very important point that we have to require our suppliers and manufacturers and our employees is that no bribery or corruption shall be tolerated at all. The offering, paying, soliciting or accepting bribes or kickbacks, including facilitation payments, shall be strictly prohibited. A bribe may involve giving an offering from any gift, consideration, reward, or advantage to someone in business or government in order to obtain or retain a commercial advantage, or to introduce or reward the recipient for acting improperly. And it could be, for example, a direct bribe or indirectly bribe through a representative, an intermediary, or a third party. Here you can have, for example, a sample of such bribery scandals. It will happen in Walmart, Mexico, and they discovered that they were being bribes for more than $300 million, and it shall be cut for companies from the root. And we are going to finish the most typical standards that companies require to their suppliers and manufacturers by speaking about the human rights and the legal requirements. No harsh or inhuman treatment is allowed, so it's not allowed, of course, physical abuse, the threat of physical abuse, sexual or other harassment, and verbal abuse or other forms of intimidation shall be prohibited, as moving in the workplace, etc. And finally, of course, legal requirements. As I told you, we are not speaking about legal requirements. Here you have again the Carroll's theory, the Carroll's peer pyramid, and we are not in the legal level. We are above. We are in the ethical level, but of course, the company shall not hire with any supplier or manufacturer that do not fulfill with every legal requirements. The company shall be committed to full compliance with the laws and regulations in each procurement location where the company conducts business, and will not knowingly operate in violation of any such regulation or law. And finally, the company will not knowingly use suppliers who violate applicable laws and regulations. And we're going to finish the video by speaking about how a company can protect itself and the top management level through the several criminal practices, several crimes that could be committed around the company. As you may be aware, a big company is surrounded by a lot of risk, and a lot of crimes could be committed within the company. We are speaking about tax crimes, for example, tax avoidance. We are speaking about labor crimes, about criminal code, corporate crimes, public health and safety, environment crimes, IP, intellectual property or IT crimes, money laundering crimes, And in order to prevent such kind of liabilities and such kind of responsibilities of the company, it's a very important topic called the Manual of Criminal Risk Prevention or Crime Prevention Manuals, which are gonna protect the company and the top management level from any crimes that could happen within the company. And we are gonna finish the video by speaking about how companies and the top management level could avoid its liabilities, its responsibilities. As you may know, for example, here under the Spanish law, if an employee commits a crime within a company, the company itself could be punished, the company itself could be punished under the criminal law, and even the company could be punished with their winding up and liquidation. So the companies have to be very careful to prevent such kind of crimes. And even if an employee commits a crime within the company, in some cases, the top management level, the board of directors, could be punished as well. So the board of directors have to be the first interest people in avoiding such kind of liabilities. And under the Spanish law, there could be an exception of such liabilities of the company and the board of directors if they fulfill certain requirements. The most important requirement that they have to fulfill in order to avoid possible liabilities, possible criminal liabilities, is to have a prevention model or a manual of criminal risk prevention. So a paper in which you write down what are your measures to prevent crimes and how are you fulfilling with such manual of criminal risk prevention. Another important requirement is the monitoring of the prevention model. It's not worth it if a member, for example, a member of the board of directors is the people in charge of monitoring such prevention model. So there shall be compliance officers within the company or a third party. By entrusted to a compliance officer the prevention model, you assure that it's going to be an independent party, so you cannot appoint a member of the board of directors as the compliance officer. And finally, another requirement in order to avoid criminal responsibility for the directors and for the company itself is that the offender had committed the crime fraudulently and avoiding prevention controls. And finally, there have not been omission or insufficient oversight by the compliance officers or the supervisory body. So it's important that the company and the board of directors fulfill with those requirements, have a prevention model, have a manual of criminal risk prevention, so that they can avoid its criminal liability in the case that some crime be committed around the company. Crimes related with money laundering, tax crimes, corporate crimes, etc. You have a couple of prevention models of manual of criminal risk prevention on the modules part. As lectors, I really encourage you to take a look on those manual of criminal risk prevention. Well, thank you, students. This is all. I'm gonna see you on the next video. Thank you, students.